Hello again and welcome to Pick Yourself, the podcast that helps you build a meaningful electronic music career. If your goal is to create and release outstanding music on respected labels, get better bookings and grow a tribe of true fans instead of just social followers, then this show is for you. My name is Philip, thanks for tuning in, and now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome to episode 31 of Pick Yourself. I'm super happy to have you here with me again this week. And since we're still in the middle of the corona crisis, I just hope that you're still healthy. I hope you're doing fine. And if you need a little bit of exchange with other people, you need a little bit of solidarity, just go to pickyourselfpodcast.com/community and join our private Facebook group because we have some amazing people there. We help each other. And I think going through this together is just way easier. So head over there, pickyourselfpodcast.com/community and join our little group of amazing people. Now, before we jump into this week's episode, let me quickly mention something here. I think this is one of the best moments in your artist career to actually make a change and to implement things and to do stuff, to move things forward and prepare for the time after the crisis. So if you're the kind of person that likes to do things and likes to actually implement things that you learn on this podcast, please head over to pickyourselfpodcast.com/free and grab my 7 strategies of highly successful electronic music artists. So this is a completely free guide that takes you only about 5 to 10 minutes to read maximum, but it can dramatically change the outcome of your artist career and the things that you can implement right now. So head over pickyourselfpodcast.com/free and let me know what you think of that. Let me know if it helps you. Okay, so in this week's episode, we are talking about how to generate song ideas in electronic music. And I'm going to share with you some strategies that I think work extremely well. And you can try them out. You can see what works for you, but I hope you're finding some inspiration in that. So first of all, I think it is super difficult to come up with new song ideas again and again and again, and at the same time not repeating yourself. So that's quite a hard thing to do. And as an electronic music producer, this is especially difficult because most of these typical songwriting formulas of other genres don't really apply here. So you have to be willing to experiment a little bit. So when we take a look at the electronic music genre as a whole, I think the amount of releases has increased tremendously in the last years. So most electronic music producers put out several singles and EPs per year, and some even publish an album from time to time in between. So the output is increasing a lot. It does not necessarily mean that the quality is getting better, but overall, if you just release one song a year, that's probably not going to be enough. And then an EP every 2 years or something. And so the release rhythm in genres like techno, house, or other forms of electronic music is much higher compared to other genres. And that means, essentially you have to come up with way more ideas for songs because only a couple of ideas will actually turn into songs. So before finishing a tune, you might have had 3 to 5 song ideas that didn't make it for whatever reason. So in order to publish 12 songs a year, which would be 1 a month, it's not that much these days, but 12 songs a year, you would have probably had more than 40 song ideas in your backlog and as production sketches lying around. So coming up with 40 different ideas to end up with 12 different songs, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of idea generation you have to pursue. And please don't be scared by these numbers. I know that for some of you this might sound super unrealistic. I think that quality still is more important than a quantity of songs, but in an optimum scenario, you would have both. So you would have high quality tunes coming out at some regular rhythm. It doesn't have to be 12 songs a year, but I would say at least 6 to 8 songs a year. That should be a thing that you should aim for. Now, coming back to the topic of generating song ideas, I think the goal should not be to create as many song ideas as possible. Because what does that mean, having a song idea, having a loop floating around? That doesn't mean anything if it's not turning into a song later on. So your goal should be to pump out as many song ideas as possible that are worth pursuing. So ultimately, you want to increase your chances of writing a full track every time you sit down to produce music. That is obviously hard to achieve, but that should be your ultimate end goal. So bottom line here, you want to generate song ideas that are worth pursuing, that have high chances of ending up being a full production later on. And I'm now going to share with you my top 5 ways of achieving this. So number 1 on my list, go out and grab some field recordings. Okay, this is an obvious one you might think, but I'm giving you very specific tips on what you can do here. So overall, using field recordings to spark new song ideas is probably my favorite way of kickstarting creativity. The big advantage of these recordings is that they're inherently unique. Yeah, so that's quite cool because every single recording you make contains a special moment. Yeah, you've been at a certain place at a certain time, and there's a certain reason why you grabbed exactly that sound that you recorded. And that means you automatically benefit from some story element in your music because you might remember the specific time and day, your mood maybe, the space that you were in when you recorded this. So all of these things can help you later on in the production stage because it's a natural source of inspiration. Your mind starts to travel back to that moment when you recorded it. And in consequence, this means using field recordings in your music and using field recordings to kickstart the creative process even can help you achieve a more unique sound overall. And that's a big thing. And when you think about field recordings, it's clear that the environment where you make the recording has a huge influence on what you end up with in the end. So that means you have different options at hand. So the first option is to go completely into nature. The second option is to go completely in a city environment. And there's obviously something in between as well, but I will just stick to the 2 big, different options here. So let's start with the first option, that is going into nature. A lot of research has been done on how our brainwaves start to change for the better after just a few minutes of walking through a forest. And I think it's incredible how the sounds and the smells of nature influence our minds. So your stress level goes down, you make new neural connections, and also your ability to solve higher level problems increases. Yeah, so there's research that proves these things. And all in all, I think you couldn't ask for a better state of mind to kickstart your creative process. So I'm a huge fan of going into nature, on the one hand because I love collecting edible plants and mushrooms and so on. Yeah, not the psychedelic ones, the normal ones. But apart from that, I think going into nature to grab also some field recordings is an incredibly rewarding process. It has so many benefits because your state of mind is already quite relaxed. You are in a different position mentally, and that makes it easier when you then enter the studio afterwards. You already had enough fresh air, you are calm, and you simply cannot wait to get started with the creative process then. So you have this excitement going of finally entering the studio and taking all these sounds that you just collected and putting them into your session and playing around with them. And I think that nature is one of the best sources for sounds as well. You have this never-ending catalog of interesting sounds in forests, in parks, but also on beaches. And you might start with the obvious things like bird sounds, for example. This is a really obvious one. Or trees shaking in the wind. But then you start to enter this little hidden world of bugs and plants below your feet and stuff below the surface. And then, for example, putting your field recorder inside a condom, for example, and putting that underwater and record some sounds there. So you can do some crazy things simply by getting a little bit more creative. And after a certain time, you learn so much about how your environment sounds. For example, cracking different types of wood, that definitely creates a very different sound. Like each type of wood creates a very different percussive sound. And this is great. It's very, very rich percussions. There's a lot of interesting, unique aspects to these sounds. Or rummaging around in a pile of leaves, for example, that can turn into your favorite background ambience. Yeah. And after a couple of hours in nature, you have this vast catalog of interesting sounds. And then when you take that back to the studio, you are mentally relaxed, but also you have so many great, interesting starting points for new song ideas. And I think this is one of the best ways to kick this off. Then you can obviously also go to the other direction, and that is going into the city to grab field recordings. So I personally prefer much more to be in the forest, but on the other hand, I must say that, especially in electronic music, the city offers so many great sounds that might even suit the purpose better. And there you can grab some fantastic field recordings. The hectic, loud and busy city life. This offers a very different style of sonic material compared to nature. But I think both can also complement each other quite nicely. So on the one day you go into nature, on the next day you go into the city, you grab very different sonic material, and then on the third day you go back into the studio and you have this incredible, diverse catalog in front of you. And this is an amazing starting point for your session. So the more obvious sounds you would capture in the city are, for example, traffic sounds from cars and the subway, people walking and talking in the streets, and then you start banging things against surfaces to create interesting sounds. But that's just the beginning, I believe. I definitely encourage you to bring your own collection of items. For example, coins or sticks and strings and whatever else might help you reveal the sonic beauty that's hidden in the streets. Yeah, and then you start to look for the non-obvious sounds. I've recorded some of my best samples in, for example, abandoned industrial buildings and other very unique places. And if that's not available in your area, you can even experiment with going to a junkyard or asking the owner of an interesting space if they let you in to grab some field recordings. So I have asked the people at one famous art museum here in Berlin, and they have such an interesting architecture with spaces that are very uniquely shaped, which makes for a very interesting type of reverb and ambience. And so I've asked them if I can just go there and grab some field recordings, and they were totally down for it. They loved the idea, and I could just enter, play around, brought my own materials and threw them into the space and recorded the reverb sound and the impact of that. I closed doors and recorded this big swoosh sound that then happened afterwards. And they were fine with it. I had a very fantastic day and I came home with a bunch of recordings that are incredible. Yeah. So all of these things are possible inside a city environment. Now, let me give you some best practice for recording awesome samples. I think grabbing field recordings is not that hard if you follow some general rules, and this is what I recommend to also my coaching clients. So first of all, you can start simply by using your phone. Don't make it super complicated, just start. Use your phone and grab some first recordings and just play around with them, because this will create the first moments of joy for you. And even if it doesn't sound spectacular, even if it's just a mono sound that you record, it still can create a very interesting starting point for songs. And then if you have gained some experience, it's worth investing in a proper field recorder. So I personally have had great experiences with the recent models by Zoom. I have the Zoom H6, I think it's called. And they have the benefit of being very easy to operate, and also the sound quality is quite decent. Other brands might offer good sound quality as well, but I'm personally not a big fan of diving through 5 submenus just to increase the mic gain. And with the Zoom models, it's just immediately available at your fingertips, and that is something that I personally enjoy because I want to focus on capturing the right sound and not on fiddling around with some submenus. And what's super important when you start grabbing the field recordings is to leave enough headroom. Yeah, so you carefully adjust your input gain on your mic gain. Make sure that you leave more headroom than you think you need, because especially when you try to capture very percussive sounds, you might easily clip the analog to digital converters, and this would create nasty digital distortion artifacts and would basically ruin the recording. And here's a little pro tip for you. Before capturing the actual sound, leave a little voice note and tell your future self what you're about to capture. This is a very cool trick because then later on it makes it easier to find a specific sound or to remember what that exactly was. And as soon as you're done with your field recording session, go home and do your homework. Name the files, categorize them in folders, and save the best edited samples in a special folder, and this is going to be the starting point of your next studio session. So that's it for field recordings. Now let's come to my second idea here. Load some samples into your session and completely destroy them. So let's say you're not in the mood for a walk, or you simply don't have the time to capture your own field recordings. I have another great way of generating song ideas. And this one is probably a bit more aggressive, but it can lead to super interesting results. So the idea here is to import some random samples into your session and completely destroy them. I truly mean it. Whatever you end up with must sound completely different from the original sound. And the cool thing here is, since you want stuff to sound completely different from the original, well, you can just use the standard sample packs that come with your DAW, first of all. Later on you can expand, of course, but start with something you already have. So every DAW comes with a lot of sounds that are already part of the library, and you can just use them to begin with. And there's no limit to your creativity here. You simply try to create unique sonic textures that evoke some emotion. That's the idea behind that. You can use whatever tools you have, but let me just give you a quick example of how this could work. So first of all, you import a standard, boring, let's say, snare sample into your session. And first, you use some warping, time stretching, or whatever you want to call it, to double its length, which already makes it sound very, very different. And then next, let's say you put a dense reverb on it, as well as some grain delay. And after that, you follow it up with a saturator, and then with a compressor, and you completely nuke the settings, meaning you're using an unnatural amount of compression and distortion. So it starts to sound very, very different already. And then, this is like already sounding so different from the original, you can render or bounce the sound file in its full length, including the reverb and delay tail, and then re-import it into your session. And then it's not over yet, yeah? You can still use that exported and imported sample, which sounds very different already, and you can chop this up into different little parts that sound promising, and then you can start putting effects on those as well. Yeah, as I've said, there's no limit. You can go through how many layers you want. At some point, you will reach very, very interesting, unique sounds that are completely different from your starting point. And this is when you hit the sweet spot. And the funny thing is, since you already have that effects chain going, you can just start throwing very different samples and other types of sounds onto that channel, and it will still run through these processors. Yeah, so this is also a very nice way of working. You can create very different textures with little effort by just throwing in different samples into your weird plugin chain that you created. And you can even take this one step further, this whole sample meshing idea. So the process that I've just described, this can be done with the stock plugins of Ableton or any other DAW you use. But if you enjoy this way of generating song ideas by sample meshing, you can go one level deeper and use, for example, more complex tools like the Molecular by Native Instruments. This is one of the tools that I love using. This is a paid plugin, but there are also many free plugins available, either on the as Reactor libraries on the Native Instruments platform, or also on Max for Live tools inside Ableton. There are also many free patches that are super creative sample meshing tools. And they are usually a little bit harder to operate, and it takes a little bit of time to get into that. But it can be so rewarding because the way you manipulate sounds gets super advanced at some point. So overall, this way of coming up with new song ideas is very easy to implement, but it's also very dangerous. You might end up tweaking samples for hours, but without having any song structure in place. And that can turn into a problem then. So the next trick that I'm going to show you is the exact opposite. It's about being fast and modulating on the fly. So number 3 here is hold a single note or a chord and automate it with effects into complete mayhem. So this one is so simple, but it helps you generate many song ideas without much effort. Here's how it works. You play one or several simple notes on a virtual synthesizer in your DAW, and you directly record a single take. Start to finish, just one take. And you should have 5 to 10 minutes of relatively boring material, just changing a couple of MIDI notes. And now it's time to spice it up a bit. You start with modulating the synth parameters and you draw automation lanes. So for example, you use cutoff and resonance settings of your filters. Maybe also you modulate the ADSR envelope or the wave shapes. So depending on the synth you use, different parameters might give you interesting results. And try to use the modulation to tell a story. Yeah? Guide the listener throughout the whole piece and create different parts, simply using the automation lanes. And then you start putting creative effects on top and you modulate their parameters as well. So stuff like I've shown you in tip number 2 before. So in the end, you should have something that is already pretty promising. It's a first guideline of your song, basically. You have 5 to 10 minutes available of material that already modulates heavily and tells a story for the listener. And this is a very interesting guiding track, so to speak, for all the rest. From there on, it's just about adding the right groove and finalizing the parts. The most tricky aspect of this approach is that you have to make sure the song is modulating enough, because otherwise you would end up with a pretty boring piece of drone music that just has a couple of notes, but it's not very interesting. If that's your thing, then it's even better for you. But for those of you who want to have a little bit more complex songs, you must ensure that the modulation is done right. So, song idea trick number 4. Program a drum beat, convert to audio, and then slice and swap it. So if you try to generate a song idea by programming the drums from start to finish, you often end up with a pretty boring standard beat. Yeah. So here's my go-to recipe for making things a bit more interesting and unique. So first of all, you need to program at least 5 to 10 different drum patterns by drawing MIDI notes or using a sequencer or virtual drum machine to generate them. So you have 5 to 10 different patterns, and then you duplicate these MIDI patterns and you feed them into different virtual or analog drum machines. Yeah. So let's say you program 10 different patterns and you route them into 3 different drum machines. You would end up with 30 different sounding patterns. There are still relatively standard patterns, but at least you have a larger variety of different patterns and also different sounds of the same patterns. And then all you have to do is to bounce them to audio files and then cut them into interesting little pieces. Yeah. So you have these 30 different sounding patterns, you cut little interesting pieces out of them, and then you can mix and match. Yeah. So you can combine different parts of different patterns with different drum sounds. And in the end, that can create a large variety of very interesting little subgrooves for your song. This is way more rewarding than just trying to program the perfect piece start to finish. So this idea might be for the people that are inspired by groove. Yeah, so some people are more inspired by melody, by harmony and so on, and some people are more inspired by the right groove. And this is definitely the creativity kick-off idea for the people that are driven by the groove, first of all. If you are more the kind of melody harmony person, then the trick that I showed you before might be the right one for you. And so my 5th and final idea here. This is kind of the best of both worlds. And also it's something for the people that enjoy playing live. So this idea is create an orchestra of machines and be the conductor. So this idea to come up with song ideas is a very playful one. Imagine you're the conductor of an orchestra, but instead of conducting human players, you are conducting several different MIDI instruments. It's a bit like playing an electronic music live show. So first of all, you need to hook up all the analog and digital pieces of equipment you want to be part of your machine orchestra. And then you start to create several main patterns and motifs. And you create them as MIDI events, which you can then launch in your session. So with DAWs like Ableton or Bitwig, this is relatively easy because they have this live-oriented clip view thing. But even in more traditional DAWs like Cubase or Logic, you have sequencing tools and plugins that you can use to generate different MIDI patterns. Yeah, and they also allow you to seamlessly switch from one pattern to the next. And now it's all about performance and capturing some magic moments. And you can either conduct your orchestra as a whole by using MIDI controllers, like the APC40 MK2 is the one that I use for this kind of technique, but it doesn't really matter, just some MIDI controller that works for you. And you can also do it track by track and layer one on top of the other, but just make sure that you preserve this live moment. This is really important. And the live feeling gets even more intense if you also modulate parameters on the fly and directly record things like filter modulation or changes in the ADSR envelopes. So all these things you can modulate on the fly while recording. And nothing's sacred here, and you can, of course, even combine this technique with the other ones that I've laid out before. So, for example, putting some sample meshing plugins on top of that to create very weird sounds on top of it. So all of that works really, really well. The only thing here is you have to restrict yourself also. This can get super complex, and you might end up with a very strange combination of very diverse sounds, so to speak, that don't play really together and just generate material. And then later on, it's really hard to sort through 20 different tracks of material that you might or might not use. So I think it's better to restrict yourself to a couple of main patterns that you create and then try to modulate them and tell a little bit of a story throughout the song. So these were my 5 tricks to generate song ideas. Now let's see how we can put this into action. So I hope this episode has helped you kick off new song ideas like never before. Definitely let me know what has come out of your experiments. And here are 3 action steps that you can implement right now for your upcoming sessions. So action step number 1, next time you lack inspiration, try out the one idea that resonates the most with you. So instead of feeling overwhelmed by all these new opportunities that I've laid out here, simply focus on the one strategy that naturally resonates with you. So if you're the kind of person that enjoys long nature walks, then the first idea might be perfect for you. And if you're more like the uber nerd who hides in his or her cave and you love experimenting with weird glitch plugins, then the second idea might be the perfect fit for you. So just pick something that feels natural to you. And then gradually you can add more of these ideas to your arsenal. So if you have a couple of techniques that work for you, go all in and let them drive your creative process. Action step number 2, keep an inspiration kickstart file close to you. So this can either be a physical notebook or some file, some sheet for your sessions, and write down what is helping you when you get stuck or lack inspiration. Start with adding my 5 suggestions to that list, but continue with your own. So if you have found that something works for you pretty well to kickstart the creative process, then write it down and be more aware of that thing. And also don't put too much pressure on you. So some days it just doesn't work and that's totally okay. Use the time wisely to either relax or to dive into old projects and export interesting loops and sounds that might be suitable for a future session. Action step number 3, come up with a system for file organization. So if you come up with new song ideas all the time, but you don't structure them in a clever way, you are going to end up in a big mess of abandoned projects that don't lead anywhere. And I want you to save you from that. It's not important what exact file and folder system you use. Just make sure you have some system in place that keeps your files organized and also backed up and easily accessible from anywhere. So I highly recommend working directly with a folder that syncs with a cloud storage device like Dropbox or OneDrive or Google Drive. And whatever file system you come up with, stick to that system all the time so you always know where your stuff is. And you will never miss any file, you will never lose any session. This is just not going to happen if you have that system in place. Please do yourself a favor and keep these ideas close to you. Alright, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Now, I would love to hear from you what has helped you generate song ideas. Let me know in the comments at the blog post, pickyourselfpodcast.com. Every episode has its own dedicated blog post. I read everything, I reply to everything. But you can also just shoot me an email, whatever you feel like. You can also join our Facebook community, pickyourselfpodcast.com/community. We have a dedicated discussion thread for every episode, so you can also leave your comments there. And apart from that, I wish you the best of health for the next weeks. And if you need some inspiration on how to grow your artist career, go to pickyourselfpodcast.com/free and download the 7 strategies of highly successful electronic music artists. I really believe this is going to help you. Let me know what it did for you. And then see you next time. If you don't want to miss any of the upcoming episodes, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And you can find detailed blog posts for every single episode on pickyourselfpodcast.com. Until then, see you next time.